Preparing for an AML Investigator interview? You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 15 key questions you're likely to face. For each question, you'll see a sample answer, followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. What does an AML investigator do on a day-to-day basis? An AML investigator identifies and investigates activity that may involve money laundering, terrorist financing, sanctions evasion, or fraud. Day-to-day, I review transaction monitoring alerts, analyze customer profiles, compare activity to expected behavior, research counterparties, and document whether the activity is explainable or suspicious. If the risk is supported by facts, I escalate the case and help prepare a clear SAR or STR narrative for regulatory reporting. While answering, focus on alert review, customer and transaction analysis, identifying suspicious patterns, documenting rationale, escalating cases, and filing SARs or STRs when activity meets regulatory reporting thresholds. Question 2. Walk me through how you would investigate a transaction monitoring alert. I start by understanding why the alert triggered, such as cash structuring, rapid movement of funds, or high-risk geography. Then, I review the customer's KYC profile, occupation, expected activity, account history, counterparties, and any prior alerts. I look for a reasonable economic purpose and compare behavior against peers or stated business activity. Finally, I document my findings clearly and decide whether to close, escalate, or recommend a SAR filing. Make sure to cover the investigation sequence: alert trigger, customer profile review, transaction pattern analysis, source of funds, counterparty checks, adverse media, disposition decision, and quality documentation. Question 3. How do you distinguish unusual activity from suspicious activity? Unusual activity is activity that does not match the customer's expected profile, but it may still have a valid explanation. Suspicious activity is different because after investigation, the activity appears to lack a lawful purpose or shows indicators of money laundering, fraud, sanctions evasion, or other financial crime. I do not escalate based on one odd transaction alone. I assess the full context, customer behavior, explanations, counterparties, and documented evidence. In your answer, talk about the difference between activity that is merely inconsistent and activity that lacks a legitimate explanation after investigation, supported by facts and risk indicators. Question 4. What AML red flags would you look for when reviewing customer transactions? I look for patterns that do not make commercial sense. Examples include repeated cash deposits just below reporting thresholds, immediate outgoing wires after deposits, transactions with high-risk jurisdictions, multiple unrelated third parties, activity inconsistent with stated income, and use of shell-like entities. I also watch for circular fund flows, dormant accounts becoming active, and vague payment descriptions. One red flag rarely proves suspicion, but multiple red flags can create a strong escalation basis. Be sure to mention common red flags such as structuring, rapid fund movement, high-risk jurisdictions, third-party activity, shell companies, inconsistent business activity, unexplained cash, and unusual counterparty behavior. Question 5. What makes a strong SAR or STR narrative? A strong SAR or STR narrative is clear, factual, and easy for law enforcement or regulators to understand. I structure it around who is involved, what happened, when it happened, where funds moved, and why the activity is suspicious. I include key amounts, dates, counterparties, jurisdictions, and relevant KYC context. I avoid unsupported conclusions and explain the suspicious pattern directly. The goal is not volume, it is a concise narrative that connects facts to risk. Focus on clarity, chronology, who, what, when, where, why, specific transaction details, suspicious indicators, concise wording, no speculation, and explaining why the activity lacks an apparent lawful purpose. Question 6. What information do you review during KYC, CDD, and EDD? For KYC and CDD, I review identity, address, customer type, occupation or business purpose, expected account activity, source of funds, and beneficial ownership. For EDD, I go deeper into high-risk factors such as PEP status, adverse media, complex ownership, high-risk countries, cash-intensive businesses, or unusual wealth sources. I want to understand whether observed transactions align with the customer's profile. If the profile is weak or outdated, investigation quality suffers. Make sure to cover customer identity, beneficial ownership, occupation or business purpose, source of funds, expected activity, risk rating, geography, PEP status, adverse media, and enhanced scrutiny triggers. Question 7. Explain the risk-based approach in AML compliance. The risk-based approach means AML controls should be proportionate to the level of financial crime risk. A low-risk salaried customer with predictable payroll deposits does not need the same scrutiny as a cash-intensive business sending wires to high-risk jurisdictions. I would assess customer type, geography, products, transaction behavior, ownership structure, and adverse media. Higher-risk customers receive enhanced due diligence, tighter monitoring, and more frequent reviews, which helps teams use investigative resources effectively. In your answer, explain that AML resources are prioritized by risk level, using customer type, geography, products, channels, transaction behavior, and regulatory expectations to drive monitoring intensity. Question 8. A customer makes multiple cash deposits just under the reporting threshold across several branches. How would you investigate? That pattern suggests possible structuring, so I would aggregate the deposits by customer, account, date range, branch, and related parties. I would compare the activity to the customer's occupation or business profile and check whether cash volume is expected. I would also review withdrawals, wires, prior alerts, and any explanation or documentation. If the deposits appear designed to avoid reporting requirements and lack a legitimate source, I would escalate for SAR consideration. Be sure to discuss structuring risk, aggregation of activity, customer profile comparison, branch and date patterns, source of funds, account usage, prior alerts, documentation, and escalation if no legitimate explanation exists. Question 9. How would you handle an investigation involving a politically exposed person? With a PEP, I would apply enhanced scrutiny because the risk of bribery, corruption, and misuse of public funds is higher. I would review the person's position, country risk, source of wealth, source of funds, related parties, and adverse media. Then I would test whether transactions align with known legitimate income and expected activity. I would document the rationale carefully, escalate material concerns, and ensure any relationship decision follows the firm's EDD and approval process. Focus on PEP risk, source of wealth and funds, country corruption risk, adverse media, related parties, transaction purpose, senior approval, enhanced due diligence, and careful documentation. Question 10. What is the difference between sanction screening and AML transaction monitoring? Sanction screening checks whether customers, counterparties, vessels, entities, or payment details match restricted lists, such as OFAC, UN, EU, or UK sanctions lists. AML transaction monitoring is broader. It looks for suspicious behavior patterns like structuring, layering, rapid movement of funds, or activity inconsistent with the customer profile. Sanctions is often about prohibited dealings with specific parties or jurisdictions, while AML monitoring focuses on detecting potential financial crime behavior. Make sure to separate sanctions name or payment screening against restricted parties from AML behavioral monitoring that identifies suspicious patterns, typologies, and customer activity inconsistent with expected behavior. Question 11. What indicators might suggest trade-based money laundering? Trade-based money laundering often hides value movement inside legitimate-looking trade flows. I would look for invoices that do not match market prices, vague goods descriptions, unusual shipping routes, repeated amendments, third-party payments, or goods inconsistent with the customer's business. For example, a small textile importer suddenly paying for electronics through multiple offshore entities would deserve scrutiny. I would compare documents, counterparties, jurisdictions, and transaction purpose before deciding whether escalation is warranted. In your answer, discuss over-invoicing, under-invoicing, false goods descriptions, unusual shipping routes, mismatch between business and goods, third-party payments, dual-use goods, and high-risk jurisdictions. Question 12. What systems and sources would you use during an AML investigation? I use both internal and external sources. Internally, I review transaction history, KYC records, onboarding documents, prior alerts, relationship manager notes, and case management history. Externally, I use sanctions and PEP screening tools, adverse media databases, corporate registries, public records, and sometimes blockchain analytics for crypto exposure. I also refer to typology reports and regulatory guidance. The key is to corroborate findings across sources rather than relying on one data point. Be sure to include internal transaction systems, KYC files, case management tools, negative news, sanctions and PEP screening, corporate registries, public records, blockchain tools if relevant, and regulator guidance. Question 13. What would you do if a business stakeholder pressures you to close a case quickly? I would stay professional, but keep the investigation independent. AML decisions must be based on evidence, policy, and regulatory obligations, not business pressure. I would explain what information is still needed and provide a realistic timeline. If the pressure continued or felt inappropriate, I would document the interaction and escalate through my manager or compliance governance channel. Closing a case too quickly can create serious regulatory, reputational, and legal risk. Focus on independence, regulatory obligation, objective evidence, escalation protocols, professional communication, documentation, and refusing to compromise investigation quality for commercial or operational pressure. Question 14. How do you balance investigation quality with productivity targets? I balance quality and productivity by working risk first. I handle high-risk alerts with deeper analysis and keep lower-risk reviews focused on the trigger, customer profile, and key supporting evidence. I use structured notes, clear disposition logic, and avoid unnecessary research that does not affect the decision. At the same time, I never sacrifice documentation quality. If a case is complex, I would escalate early rather than let deadlines drive a weak conclusion. Make sure to discuss prioritization by risk, structured investigation templates, concise documentation, avoiding unnecessary research, meeting service levels, quality control, and escalating complex cases appropriately. Question 15. What current money laundering typologies should an AML investigator be aware of? AML investigators should stay close to evolving typologies. Common current risks include mule accounts receiving scam proceeds, synthetic identity activity, crypto exchange on-ramps and off-ramps, shell company layering, professional enablers, trade-based laundering, and sanctions evasion through intermediaries. I would not treat typologies as checklists. I use them to recognize patterns and ask better questions. Staying updated through regulatory notices, FinCEN advisories, FATF reports, and internal trends improves investigation judgment. In your answer, mention mule networks, synthetic identities, crypto off-ramps, scam proceeds, shell entities, professional enablers, trade-based laundering, sanctions evasion, and the need to follow evolving typologies. If you are still with us, congratulations. You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.